This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed part one of this really fun interview with Tom Sawyer. Here comes the second part. Enjoy. Well, one of the people that we didn't talk about that was, I think, very important to you, and I know he was important to me, especially when I got started in 1980. I got into the business in 79, but I didn't open my club till 1980. And one of the comics that was just a normal guy and went way out of his way to always support me, help me, guide me, teach me was Bob Saget. And I met him through Dave Coulier, who was somebody I met at the store and really was the inspiration for me opening my clubs. So Dave Coulier introduces me to Saget. They introduced me to Seinfeld and Shandling, and it goes on and on and on. But Bob was such a great giving guy and so freaking funny on stage. I know he meant a lot to Cobb's. Do you have any good Bob Saget stories?
I remember the first time I booked Bob, and I was at Cobb's, and we were going to pick him up at the airport, and Rob Becker was hanging out. And those of you out there who don't know who Rob Becker is, he's the guy who created the longest running one-man show in Broadway history, which is Defending the Caveman. Super nice guy, but I said, "Hey, you want to join me? I'm going to pick up Saget." And he goes, geez, I'm not really a fan. I go, "Well, you're not a fan. You just come along with the ride." And you have to remember that at that time, Bob Saget's act was like, kind of G-rated-ish, really, homespun, probably what helped him get a Full House, He really did kind of project that goofy dad personification. And so we go to pick him up at the airport. And within 10 minutes, we're almost swerving off the road. Because we're laughing so hard, we get tears rolling down our face. I can't tell you. I can't remember most of the stuff he said, and it's because most of it was so vile. I think there are laws. There are still laws in the book that prohibit me from saying them. But the funniest, dirtiest guy that I've ever backstage. Tears. Everybody's in tears, laughing. The grossest stuff out of this guy's face, and he's like, and it's like dad saying stuff, and you get a little bit of the taste of him because there's a lot of Bob Saget in the movie, the Comedy Club, but it gives you a little bit of a taste of it. But I would also recommend to anybody who really wants to know the real Bob Saget, watch the documentary The Aristocrats. That.
Yeah,
but be prepared. You're going to be disgusted a number of times. You're not going to believe how pornographic a joke can be told, and this is the same joke over and over and over again for like almost an hour and a half. But it's told by comics. There's so many amazing comics, and when you get to Saget, even the camera, you can see the camera jiggling a bit because the cameraman is laughing so hard. Bob was the filthiest guy ever off stage.
Oh, he won that, and he was not Danny Tanner in that movie.
No.
And I think even after Full House, I was working with him. He came back and did my 10th anniversary, him and Dave, and they were already huge stars. And what was interesting was that we had to warn people. They wanted to bring their kids to the show, to see the Full House guys.
Yeah.
And we're like, no, you don't understand. TV is TV. On stage, it's a different world. And I think Bob really appreciated that in a comedy club, he could be who he was, which was, like you said, a filthy comic, but it was not, it wasn't, it's so funny. I want everyone to understand. And Tom, I know you'll relate. It wasn't like some of the young people you would see where it's just F-bomb, C word, N word, whatever. It was dirty, but it was almost intellectual dirty. I mean, it was gross and disgusting and absolutely hilarious. but it wasn't just swearing. It was
it wasn't
art.
mean spirited. That's the thing. It wasn't mean spirited.
That's a good way to put it.
Bob was, Loki-ish. It was like he was mischievous. It was almost, he was saying it. And you have to understand too, the people who do know his stand-up and watching his specials last in the years prior to his death. Bob, in the beginning, Bob was so clean. He was ridiculously clean. And then everybody was encouraging him, his management, his agency. Hey, you need to be that guy that makes us laugh really hard. You need to figure out a way to transition over to that guy. And he finally, said, okay, I'm going to do it. And started being incredibly filthy on stage. Again, not even as filthy as he is off stage, but way closer than he was before. So it was actually a joy to see him make that transition.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, you would agree. For me, one of the paths that he took for the transition, a lot of people don't know he was basically a comic musician in the beginning, and he used his music to transition into the filthy stuff. I think was part of the tools he used to bring out that character. What did you think of his music?
Oh, I thought it was always funny. It was always original. He hardly ever did song parodies, which was a big thing in the '80s. Doing song parodies. So they're mostly original songs. So it was just a lot of fun. He would just bring them out at the end, and later on, of course, they got filthy as well. So,
well, we've both had a chance to work with some amazing, talented people, and it was one of my great loves of my life. One of the things I look back on, and the reason I do this podcast is I'm kind of in a selfish way trying to relive those years, because the relationships, my wife and I often say, we don't miss running a club at all, but we miss the relationships and the people and the talent that we got a chance to work with. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Oh yeah. And the thing I realized the most, especially when I sold the club to Live Nation, and was just the booker, and also for a room that no longer really was conducive to young comics. And then you had the bigger headliners who bring their own acts, which I always hated, because they always brought, 90% of them brought like acts that weren't good, so they were easy to follow. I was the kind of the opposite. I mean, Dom Herrera always busted my balls, because I had people like Chelsea Handler open for him, Margaret Cho open for him, Greg Proops open for him. It was like, he was like, "What are you doing to me?" And I go, "Dude, you can handle it." And he would handle it. He would do a great job. He goes, "But I don't want you coasting here. You can't coast. These guys want your spot.
Yeah. You got to make them work."
That was the thing. The Cobbs. The people that were featuring were headliners in other clubs. The people that were emceeing were feature acts, other clubs. Everything was a notch up. So you had to bring your A game. You couldn't slack off or ride on your coattails. And that was the only thing I didn't like about. The main thing I didn't like about the Columbus Avenue Club was I wasn't able to develop young comics anymore, because there weren't young comics around, and we couldn't really do a showcase there, because showcases you generally have 50, 70, 80 people. And when you have a 400-seat room, it's like playing a nobody, and it's really hard to get any momentum going for young comics. It's a nightmare. You don't have any intimacy. So it wasn't a great room for young comics. And that really bothered me more than I expected it to.
Well, I think that both of us have that heart that we like developing talent, want to see people that have talent grow. We also had the ability to see when somebody didn't have talent and have the balls to tell them, hey, this may not be your cup of tea.
Bowling.
But, you talk about Live Nation and them taking over the room, or the way they ran the punchline. That was the corporate comedy world, and that was not ever, I liked your club and the Holy City Zoo and even the other cafe. There's a few clubs in LA. My club, there's a few around the country where they were basically family operated clubs, or, sole owner clubs that had a love for the art form and for the people in that art form, and weren't just trying to make a buck. I'm one of the few clubs that never had a 2-drink minimum, because to me, it was not about selling drinks and getting people drunk and making the money. It was, for me, it was all about the show. But that's me. Yeah. For you, let's transition from some of the great people we had a chance to work with to being a club owner. Now, both you and I know that it's one of the hardest jobs, because people think, oh, geez, you're throwing talented people up on stage. How difficult is that? But they don't realize that when you're a comedy club owner, you're a restaurateur, you're a bar owner, and you're producing a show. You have to wear so many hats. What would you say, because you have many, many years experience running Cobb's and booking Live Nation, what was the worst part of owning a comedy club?
Well, it's the buck stops here kind of thing. You're the general, you're the captain of the ship, and sometimes I think in the early days, I think that went to my head a little bit, and I had some people that I really loved to kind of do an intervention with me and say, hey, your shit smells just like everybody else, so get off your cloud and just be a human being. You turn this little bar on Chestnut Street into like one of the clubs that's mentioned a bunch on all the talk shows, but you're still a regular guy, and we like the regular guy better. So that was one of the things. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize when you're the owner is, with buck stopping here, that you're the guy who has to make the decision when you're there. When people are acting up, and you have to deal with that. I would always be the guy, so they didn't have to say, I want to speak to the owner. I would be like, when they went to me and said, I want to speak to the owner, I go, you're already there. So I'm the guy who's throwing you out. So don't. So we bypassed the middleman. We're into the point where the owner's telling you to get the hell out of the joint. So I didn't. I really, really, hated putting on that hat of being the bouncer. When that had to happen. But I didn't really want my staff having to deal with it. Something that I didn't like dealing with. So I would do it myself. And then later on, it became a little easier when we had security at the cannery, because you just called security up, and you would tell somebody that to leave, and if they didn't leave, then you'd have security, cannery security, take them out. So, but it wasn't luckily it wasn't something that happened a lot, but it definitely happens enough if you're in the comedy club business. I think if you're a regular comedy club patron, you've been to that show where that guy or that gal won't shut the hell up, and somebody has to talk to them, or somebody has to tell them to get out. So that's the part I didn't like the most. Everything else, I kind of dug. I had a good relationship with both mayors in San Francisco when we were huge, Willie Brown and Gavin Newsom. I was on a first name basis with both of them. If we had any problems with anything city-wise, I'd call them up. The problem would go away. They'd fix it. So, those guys showed up at the club all the time. It was really, it's nice when you have a good relationship with everybody, and you're fair and honest and open with everybody. And, and I find that's the best way to work any business. If you're a business entrepreneur out there, be honest. And don't be greedy. That was the big thing I think that was the key to Cobb's success, was I was never greedy. The headliners always made more than me. It was more important for me to have those guys walk out with going, oh my God, I made more money here than I made at the Punchline, which was twice the size of Cobb's on Chestnut Street. That's what ended up getting us Jerry Seinfeld and Richard Lewis and Bill Maher. Is everybody was like, hey, that little club in Chestnut Street in San Francisco, you can make some serious coin there. So, then I had agents calling me and, hey, we'd like to get our guy in there. And that opened the door to all kinds of talent. word of mouth spread, and everybody wanted to play the club.
Well, you touched on so many important things. First off, going back to one of the worst parts of being a club owner, you're absolutely correct. As the club owner, we're responsible, at least in a family-based club. I was always the bouncer of my club, and I had some experience. I'd been a bouncer at a disco for a couple of years, and I'm a big guy naturally, so I was always the bouncer of my club. And my backup, I had to call the city police. But again, they loved my location. They knew I was rarely an issue. So when I did call in, they were on it. But yeah, that's definitely one of the challenging things. The other thing I felt as a club owner was that financially, it really had a lot of ups and downs. And I found later, as I ended up opening a number of other businesses, that just being an entrepreneur leads to financial instability. You know, you have the really wealthy days or weeks or months, and then you have the times that you're scraping up because you got to pay your taxes, and you
got to pay your staff. You got to pay your workers. You come in last. You know, when the times are good, you're coming first. It's awesome. You know, but when the times are bad, it's like all of a sudden you're the one who's got to take a pay cut because you don't want to lose. You need your staff because it's still jamming on Saturday night. You know, you can't afford to lose your staff, so you're the one who has to take a hit. You know, I mean, good times are great, bad times suck. You know, but I was always trying to get ahead of. You know, was pretty good at fixing things and seeing a problem and being a very aggressive in how to fix it. So, you know, we would do the opposite of what most people would do. When times were bad, when the comedy boom bust in the early 90s, we actually spent more money on advertising, not less, because we realized that the only way to beat this is to keep putting out to the public, nothing's wrong. You know, that we're still doing great. We still have great shows. Come on down. And, you know, so we had to take less money because we were actually spending more money to advertise the club.
Well, that's so true. And a lot of people don't understand the value of advertising and also just getting the free reviews in the papers and having the listings and all the calendars and stuff. All that stuff played into keeping your business on the forefront of the customers' minds so that they came back over and over. That was always my goal, is what's going to bring them back. So T-shirt Tuesday, buy a T-shirt, you get in free on Tuesdays, or, buy this $5 plastic mug for beer and we'll give you free refills every time you bring it in. Different gimmicks to keep the people coming in. You mentioned.
Well, and also having a good relationship with, your local media is really important. We both came out of a generation where radio was actually really good before corporations destroyed it, and that was really important, is getting your people on the radio and then maybe even some television and then print media as well. But the important thing for me was, if I was doing an interview, was to give them a little bit more than they asked for, so they would think of me as a go-to guy. If anything came up, they would call me first. Unfortunately, when Robin passed, I found out about it when I was driving home, and KGO called me and wanted to know my feelings about it, and I had no idea he had died. I wasn't listening to the news. That has a downside as well. But for the most part, when you have that kind of relationship with the media, you're always, they're always calling you for an article, a quote or something, your opinion on something. So that keeps your name out there, that keeps the club's name out there. And, eventually make somebody want to do a documentary. So that was my plan. I have it actually still on my chalkboard over here.
Well, you mentioned so many things I want to just reiterate and tap on. First off, it was a big loss when Robin passed, and one of the local TV stations called me up and we did a little eulogy for him. we were talking about, and you mentioned early radio back before it went too corporate. People like Tim Bedore, and there was probably
Alex Bennett.
Alex Bennett was huge in radio and in comedy. Sorry, a big radio star who was big into comedy. People like Wil Durst and Slayton and those guys got to cut their teeth on radio with Alex.
Yeah, Cat became a huge star here, because of Alex, and so many comics became huge draws because of that, the Alex Bennett show.
Exactly. And I'm sure you know the story, but Tim Bedore was at KZAP as a radio guy, and I got him into letting him on stage and then emceeing and then becoming an act. He ended up doing some radio in the Bay Area as well. But that was where somebody in radio ended up being in comedy. There was a few people that were in comedy that ended up on radio. So it was very conducive industries.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, most of the time people would, it would be like, because Alex tried to do some comedy and, it wasn't very good. But, Tim was actually a competent comedian. He actually did a good job, could headline a show. So, that's pretty impressive when somebody transitions like that, because it's really rare somebody makes that transition.
Yeah, and they are two different worlds, but it was nice back before radio got too corporate that, the two work together. Speaking of corporate, you mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to get back to it, that you liked running a room, similar to me, where we had the opportunity to develop talent and let new people try their words on stage and try to build a comedy set, work out who they were and work out their set. When you were working with Live Nation as a booker and the clubs that were corporate, like the Punchline and stuff, you couldn't do that. I think the corporate world, at least the corporate comedy world, doesn't understand the importance of developing talent, not just trying to make a buck off the talent. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. It was really weird because, Jeff Wills, who's the guy in comedy in Live Nation and does an amazing job. He's the guy that produces Kevin Hart or Bill Burr at these, at auditoriums. I mean, at civic centers and stuff, arenas. He's amazing. But I didn't get the chance to work with him because he was in LA. When I sold the club to Live Nation and worked for Live Nation, I had to work with the Live Nation office and the corporate structure, and it couldn't have been colder. I mean, it was just so crushing in anything that you brought to them as far as like an idea or something that you thought could make the club really stand out, that you would implement if you had the power to, and they did have the power to, they would just go, nah. And it wasn't even like in a way that would just kill your soul and make you just want to not come into work anymore, because the creative part, they didn't respect that at all. It was almost like you're the guy who fills the Slurpee cup, not so much you're the guy who develops talent. That disrespect that came there almost instantly from the day one I worked there. It was almost like I was a stranger in my own house, and everybody would seem like they were, protecting their turf. I'd go to the club, the new GM and the assistant GM were kind of whispering to themselves. We weren't working as a team. Everybody's like working their own little part of the station, and it's like the corner, and that kind of just that gritty, yucky, no one is on the same page feeling. And doing that for 7 years was just soul killing. The only thing that helped out was I got, I had a close relationship with the people at Sketchfest, still do, because I was one of the original producers of that show before it had a meltdown. We were opening up the Cobb's club on Columbus Avenue. It was working with those people and, being able to book some amazing talent, Russell Brand and John Oliver and, Kathy Griffin before, she ran into all that kind of trouble. All these acts that I didn't have access to before that now all of a sudden I have access to, Eddie Izzard, all these people who would, be at Cobb's, Martin Mull, Fred Willard, just crazy. I mean, if you go to, you really want to see some history at Cobb's, plug, but it's really for the people that are listening. Go to TomSawyerVoices.com, click on the Cobb's Comedy Club page. You'll see a lot of comics that were performing at Cobb's, especially in the 90s and early 2000s and in the 80s. It's amazing, some amazing photos on that page. So I ask people to check that out if you want to see some amazing history.
And I have, and it was so fun for me because it's very similar to the kind of pictures I have from my club days, but being able to see people that we both worked with and then some that you got to work with that I didn't was really good. So everybody, if you get a chance, go to the Tom Sawyer website and check that out. I wanted to touch on a couple things. First off, the horrible aspect of everything going corporate. To me, you stated it so well. They tie to departmentalize. I can't say the word. It's like everybody that works in a cubicle. Nobody's interacting. Yeah. Nobody's sharing. There's no humanity. It's like the soulless version where you and I were focused on the talent and the art. They were focused on the dollar. And I think that
the other thing that was really terrible was that you would go into the office and someone's cubicle would be empty. It was sort of like, an Agatha Christie novel come to life where, instead of people being killed, they would just be disappeared. What happened? Why so-and-so? Is so-and-so sick? No, they got let go. A month later.
It's like the body snatchers.
Are they feeling okay? Should I send them some flowers? No, they got let go,
No humanity.
And then all of a sudden, some other guy has got a new pile of shit on his desk that they were supposed to take care of from the guy who got let go. So everybody's doing twice the amount of work. Everybody's run down. Nobody's inspired, and that was the thing that I think Bill Graham understood why he was such a great, while he didn't pay well and he was tough to work with because he was a hard ass, at least he made it fun. They had picnics, they had basketball games in the courtyard. They celebrated everybody's birthday every single month. They concert tickets were always ladled out to the staff. People were, got backstage. Some of the most amazing. I got backstage at Live Nation in the early days before they kind of stopped doing that as much. Before everything again became compartmentalized.
Congratulations!
We're getting closer to the word. We're getting really close to saying that word correctly. And so, Live Nation just took the joy out of working for, something that should be joyful, and made it a scary place to work. Is this the day I'm going to be let go? Is this the day, that I'm just, they want to save, $10,000 a year and get rid of me. And it just was that feeling all the time. Your stomach was kind of in knots. When are they going to think I'm not worthy of being here?
Yeah, it's just sad. And I was able to avoid that. I mean, one of the reasons I'm an entrepreneur and open my clubs is that I don't do well working for others, but going corporate the way you did, you transitioned from being self-employed to going corporate was not something I could do.
With being number one.
No. I mean, but you did it and successfully and financially to your benefit. I'm just saying my hat's off to you because that would be something that would be probably impossible for me. I did want to go back a little bit. I was asking you the worst parts of being a club owner. Maybe you could share some of the best parts. And for example, I alluded to it earlier, that interactions with the talent backstage or after the shows or when we had picnics or boating trips or something, it was the people that really kept me going. For you as a club owner, you went through a lot of trials and tribulations, losing a club, rebuilding a club, moving a club. all the same things I had to do, but there are good parts about being a club owner. Maybe share with the audience what really kept you going and what you feel looking back were life-altering or important in you.
Well, I think that I would say one of the biggest thing that was life-altering was having to fire my parents.
You fired your parents. Well, I had to fire a couple of partners. I'm sure being family would be even harder. Yeah. It keeps you. It makes a Thanksgiving conversation at the table a little uncomfortable. We actually didn't talk, especially my mother and I, for like 10 years. But we're best friends now, and our relationship's better than ever. But at the time, it was just one of those things where it just wasn't working out. I brought my folks in. I thought this was a great opportunity for them. They were big fans of comedy. I was like, hey, I can raise the money, but you're going to be partners. We'll be partners in business. And it was just a disaster. I mean, I don't want to get into anything personal, but it just didn't work out. And my ex-wife and I, we wanted to come up with a figure that we could pay them that would relieve us of most of the guilt that we were going to have to do this thing. And later on, they really appreciated that, because we took care of them, as far as, the money we gave them to leave. Yeah. In the movie, your dad mentions that they came out of it a little bit better financially than they got into it, but still firing your parents is tough. But I think you missed the question, Tom. What was the best part of owning a club? Firing your parents probably wasn't the best. It definitely was life altering.
Yeah, it was life altering. Well, you said life altering. I think that's right. Well,
that was a great story. Actually, it's difficult to work with family.
Yeah, I think it made me a better person. I think overall it made me a better person. I started out, when I got major success, it went to my head. I was definitely being an asshole. I had people that I loved and respected call me out on it, and I tried to make a big turn after that, and I think I mostly was successful. And it was really important to me to have a relationship with my staff. It was really important for me to have a relationship with my with the comedians who played the club. The staff. We had such a low turnover at Cobb's. We would have people when they would finally leave because they were in college learning to do make a career that would eventually get them out of the bar business. But I had so many people apologize when they had to make that career change that they worked so hard to get to. And, people generally work like, 2, 3, 4 years at the club. And so it was like, everybody was like family. I mean, we'd hang out at night, we crank up the Pink Floyd and just sit around drinking beers and listen to music as loud as hell. And, everybody we hanging out afterwards. We had impromptu parties all the time. I mean, another thing you'll see again, if you go to the Cobb's comedy page at TomSawyerVoices.com, you'll see I have put on pictures of parties, and you won't see famous people, but you'll see people that worked at the club. You'll see people that hung out at the clubs, young comics that hung out at the clubs, because we had impromptu parties all the time.
Hey, that was the end of second part of the Tom Sawyer interview. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I had fun doing it. We have part 3 coming up next. Again, if you get a chance, rate us and share us wherever you can. Hey, we really appreciate you listening. Here we go.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.